to his state and also across the Midwest.
Mr. Chairman, you know, the person who's been forgotten in all the debate that's been happening is the American worker. My dad, I can remember when I was a little kid, used to pack his lunch box, that black tin box with the round top, with a salami sandwich, piece of fruit, and a thermos of coffee, as he would rise early in the morning, go off to work at the factory, and come back with a sense of satisfaction that he had made something with his hands. And Dad perhaps is the emblem of the American worker, somebody who actually worked in a factory and then became a master meat cutter in his grocery store, master restaurateur, at the same time was an expert carpenter, cabinet maker, person who could do marvelous things with the hands that God gave him. Dad perhaps also is the picture of the American that we are not examining as we take a look at this entire cap and trade system. Because after all, it's the American worker who is going to be disadvantaged in many ways because of this theory that the majority wants to impose upon the American family, which according to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office would spike the cost of energy for the average American family of somewhere between $700 and $2,200 a year. So we start with the fact that the American worker is going to be paying a lot more for his or her energy at home before he leaves and goes off to the factory. And once he gets to the factory, exactly what's going to happen? Well, the factory is already under tremendous competition. Competition domestically because of high productivity of the American manufacturers, and competition because of offshore, because of countries that don't have OSHA standards, that have very few environmental standards, who care less about the safety of the worker and more about shipping that product to the United States. So we start with a distinct disadvantage already in the manufacturing sector. How much more can the American worker take? How much more can the owner of that factory take? I assembled this past week, in fact yesterday, in the congressional district that I represent, congressional district that has in its largest county over 25% manufacturing base, 55 or 60 small manufacturers, and laid out to them this cap and trade system and exactly what it would mean to them as manufacturers. The looks upon their faces were nothing less than startling, because we start with the proposition that 535 people in Washington, D.C. suddenly wake up in the morning and decide, well, America should go into the green business. America should get involved into the energy-saving business, as if the American manufacturer and his worker have been on the sidelines doing nothing. You have great manufacturers out there, like the Perks family from Rockford, Illinois. The Perks family has been around for 3 generations now, involved in combustible burners. Their goal has always been to make the most efficient combustible burner possible. And they lead the world in that technology. They just didn't wake up one morning and say we should start saving energy. That's what productivity is all about. That's what the American manufacturer is all about. To be giving him the opportunity and the small inventor to be able to go out and to make products, to make them run faster, quicker, and leaner. The federal government didn't invent the term lean manufacturing. The federal government didn't come out with ISO standards of excellence and productivity. The federal government does more to hinder the innovation ability and the productivity and the energy savings of the American manufacturer than it does to help them out. Or take, for example, All-American Machinery in Harvard, Illinois, an extraordinary patent on being able to run hydraulics on an as-per unit. It gets a shot of power to move that hydraulic pump, and then the unit shuts off, saving between 60 and 80% of the energy costs versus a machine that runs all the time. No one in Washington called the people back home in Harvard, Illinois, and said, "We have this great idea for you." The people in Washington are calling the people that I represent and saying, "I've got news for you. I don't have new innovations for you. I don't have new technologies for you. I have a new tax that's going to make you less competitive with the world." The so-called cap and trade tax, because the people in this body and the other body are going to say, "We are manufacturers. We know everything about manufacturing," as we sit here in our pinstripe suits and don't even know what the sweet smell of machine oil is, because most of them have never been in a factory in their lives. And they're going to tell our American manufacturers how to run their factories. And as I talked to our American manufacturers yesterday, 55 or 60 of them, several have places where they're already manufacturing for domestic consumption in China and Mexico. And their faces spoke the results. If it's going to become so much more expensive to manufacture in the United States, we'll just do more manufacturing in Mexico and China. And you know what, Mr. Chairman? The cost of shipping finished items from China to the United States will be less than the cost of increase in power for people to make their products under the new cap and trade bill. This is absolute lunacy, to be able to subject the American manufacturer and the worker, the one that gets up at the crack of dawn every morning and packs his lunchbox and goes off to work and gets in his old car and puts in 8 and 10 and 12 hours a day working to support his family, to get the kids through college, to pay the mortgage. And all of a sudden, Congress says, "You don't know what you're doing. You don't know how to run your factory." All we have to do is look what happened in Europe, the famous cap and trade system in Europe. Now, I don't usually look to the Europeans for examples, except when they fail. And in this case, the cap and trade system, Mr. Chairman, has been a complete and total failure. And why is that? Well, it's because you go across the Straits of Gibraltar into Morocco and northern Africa, and you see countries that are not locked in to the same type of system of control emissions. In fact, Cola Holdings in Netherlands makes a silicon carbide, according to an article in the Washington Post. It's used as an industrial abrasive. The finest factory that you could find, the best in ecological construction, the finest in meeting the most stringent requirements to reduce the emissions of carbon. They're in big trouble, huge trouble, because right across in Morocco, you will find a competitor, and in China, that can make it cheaper and ship it to Europe. And so what happens to the brave soul in Europe that complies with their ill-fated cap and trade system? Probably go out of business. That's exactly what happens. And what's going to happen in the United States? There will be a southern movement to Mexico, as American manufacturers will be making more of their product in Mexico, shipping it across the border, because it will be a lot cheaper, because they won't be sacked with a cap and trade system. If you take a look at the Government Accountability Office report of December of 2008, this is our own organization that sets up standards by which to make measurements of efficiencies in different programs. And the Government Accountability Office says there are better, less expensive, and more direct methods to accomplish the goal of reducing emissions. Well, that's interesting. What are those? Well, perhaps someone ought to take a look at what the American manufacturers are already doing. You can go to a Danish manufacturer in Rockford, Illinois called Danfoss. Danfoss makes these machines that hook onto another machine, and the Danfoss machine, Mr. Chairman, measures the exact amount of energy necessary in order to run the machine, right down to the lowest fraction of electrical unit required. Highly efficient. No one from Washington called the Danfoss engineers and said, "We have an idea for you. We in Congress wear pinstripe suits, and we could tell you how to run your manufacturing facility." Or no one called the city of Rockford years ago and said, "We've got a great plan for you, that you could take the sewage that you have in the city, turn it into methane, and run 3 turbines so you could help the electrical grid, and it's a lot less carbons that are going into the air." Mr. Chairman, Washington has no news for the American manufacturer and the American worker except bad news. That's why we have to defeat this. We already have a plan in place, or planning a lot of plans in place. One is the Republican alternative, and that's the one that rewards ingenuity. It makes it a lot easier for people to change to the latest techniques to scrub the air, to scrub the environment. It just amazes me. It totally amazes me. We are in Rockford, Illinois, close to 14% unemployment. The same in Belvedere, Illinois. Our Chrysler plant is closed for 60 days. Chrysler is in bankruptcy. We've gone from 16 million cars sold 2 years ago to 8 million cars sold this year. And on top of all the problems that manufacturing is having now, we need one more regulation, one more requirement, one more chop on the block of the American manufacturer. It's time to say no to this big government that thinks it knows best. It's time to say no to Washington that thinks it has all the answers. It's time to say yes to the American worker, yes to the little inventor, yes to the American manufacturer, the people that made things with their hands, the people that created all the wealth in the world. Leaders in technology, leaders in ingenuity, not with the help of government, but with the help of their own minds and their own hands.
Well, I thank the gentleman, and he's absolutely correct. When you look at these margins of these companies